morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where we find you in the TOC world today. I am Jennifer Ekman, General Manager for the TOCICO. On behalf of the TOCICO and ASCM, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all, and we hope you are doing well during these unprecedented times. TOCICO strives to be the primary source of theory of constraints knowledge and pathway to become real TOC practitioners with member services and certification recognized worldwide, no matter where you start your journey. Today's webinar is entitled How to Avoid Costly Mistakes in Preparing Your Supply Chain for a COVID-19 Recovery. Without further delay, it's my great pleasure to hand this off to my friend and colleague, Rocco Surace, who will facilitate today's expert panel. Rocco?
Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully, I gladly sound redundant here. Wherever you are, I hope you, your family, and your colleagues are all safe and well. If that's not been the case, you have our thoughts and prayers and sympathies. So my brief introduction here is what got us here today. I am a part of the Theory of Constraints International Certification Organization, TOCICO. And we were going through the new process for us of we had to cancel our physical location conference this early summer in Paris to moving to a virtual conference. And the process of doing that and then paying attention to what's going on in the world, I thought we ought to put particular emphasis on supply chain because that is one of the expertises that is typically covered in the conference. And I thought maybe we should hone that in a little bit. So I contacted the gentleman that you see on the panel today to speak to organize that effort and really have a specialized message because of the supply chain disruptions that have been having around the world. So that's going on. That will still happen during our virtual conference. But in addition, Barnard, our speaker, said, well, maybe it's important enough that we ought to get this message out earlier, which led to us today doing this webinar ahead of time. And the format it's going to be is the panel I asked to join this was because they all have particular experiences and expertise literally around the world. And I thought would be a good cross section of experience to share. So with that leads into my opening thoughts. So if you can get to the next slide there. Thank you. So the great example is toilet paper and the disruption that happened in that supply chain and the ripple effects that had, where we're seeing the most interruptions or abnormal activity is actually in supply of medical supplies and equipment. So with all the supply chain expertise in the world, how did all this happen? So the real benefit that we want you to get out of this seminar is hopefully to open your mind to see what do you need to do to recognize and find out what's changed in the supply chain you currently participate in, what's changed in supply chains that you could potentially participate in. So that'll lead to my opening thoughts here. These are just some general questions. So what are your customers having to do differently? What is difference in the market you serve? Have you really thought about other opportunities? Okay. And do you need to rethink about the products, how they're made, where they're made, how they're distributed? There's been a lot of disruptions in that last bullet in the normal supply chain that impact many end markets. Next slide, please. For your role in the supply chain, right, it's more than likely disrupted to either a little bit or to a greater extent. So what is the path back to whatever is normal? What's a new normal? Can you think strategically? Can you offer a better way in your part of the supply chain, right? And everybody has to have a plan. I've seen a lot of great models just within the past week here, plan to restart your operations. There's a lot of great examples out there, a lot of well thought out examples. So what is the plan? What are the best practices? And do you really understand risk management from all sides? From a liability point of view, product liability, employee liability to supply chain protection. There's a lot of risk management that ought to be considered. Next slide, please. I think this is real important. You're going to hear from the speakers future, but you know, is it truly the time to leverage the power of technology in supply chain, and not just to execute a transaction, but in planning, in operations, and what I think is most importantly, in the communication within the supply chain itself. And you'll hear more about that from our speakers as we go. But this is truly, have you been leveraging all you could? And there might be great opportunity there for you. Next slide, please. All right. Now, what do you need to do? One of the things that's been disrupted along, if your supply chain is disrupted, your working capital, whatever your cash cycle is likely been disrupted. And this variability is going to continue. So manage your working capital is part of that risk management. Me being a CPA, I thought this would be a good thing. In the end, I can't tell you how many times I've seen this statement the past few weeks, but cash is king, right? So if cash is king, what do we have to defer to make or subordinate to make sure cash is king? Maintain liquidity, the proper inventory levels. What is protective capacity, future capital needs, fully understanding leverage. You know, and just one more thought, Alan, the speaker today, and Alan more so than me, had the distinct pleasure of working with Ali Goldratt. And for a period of time when I was working directly with him, with companies, in seeing what potential they had and how they leveraging their capabilities in the market. One of the concepts that Ellie taught us was, can a company actually just sell their capacity and sell it as protective capacity? And as many times as we presented that to companies, they understood the concept, but there was no real interest. Think about the value that you can offer a customer or a portion of the supply chain with protective capacity right now. You think the world might think about, is there value in buying protective capacity instead of having to buy warehouses to full with buffer inventory? So just that's an example of out of the box thinking that Ellie Goldratt introduced me to 20 years ago. So with that, I believe this is my last slide. Next slide, please. So next, I would like to introduce you to Miguel Abuhab. He is the CEO and founder of NeoGrid, a worldwide supply chain assist technology company, if you will, but he'll explain that more. And he's going to share his experiences with you. Miguel, welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. Yes, thank you, Rocco. It's good to be with you, with these people, and talk something about our experience on the supply chain. So what we have, most of the companies, they have implemented their own ERP. Manufacturers with their ERP, distributors, and retailers. The ERPs were created when the technology was client server, which means that the ERPs, they see only their own company. They don't see what is going with their products at the retail level. So I'm talking about the root causes for inefficiency, I would say before the virus, or before the crisis we are living. So manufacturer has a lack of visibility, and he wanted to exploit. His constraint was the bottleneck, and then in order to exploit the bottleneck, so he wanted to push their product to the retailers, and he or the ERP's companies started to develop a forecasting system because they didn't have information about the market, about consumer. So all the ERPs started their process developing demand planning, S&OP, and there are other names, but most of them are using historical data. On the other hand, retailers that they have the traffic, they have the people on the stores, they wanted offer better price, and they were working to get better opportunities on purchase. The prices was the king, even if they had to buy more quantities, but in a lower price. That's what they were going to do. But in order to make this opportunity purchase, they were buying much more quantities than what they really needed. And then this was hurting the cash. So most of the buyers, most of the company, they measure the buyers by unit price. So if you got a better price, you are rewarded. And even if they hurt the cash. Now, after the virus, everything has changed. The historical data that we have, the forecasting, most of the algorithms that we were using, they will lead companies to disasters, because the past history doesn't have any relationship with the new world. So we have seen a dramatic change on consumer behavior. And we get in our company, we get information daily from 80% of the total sales in our country by SKU, by location, more than 10,000 stores. And I have created a sample with 188 stores, 10 retail chains in 7 states in Brazil. And if we compare the sales on February, on March, if we say categories, we say beer is a category, milk is a category, pasta and toilet paper is a category. So we have 209 categories monitoring the retailers in our country. So if we compare March to February, we had 117 categories that increased their sales, but 92 decreased their sales, which means 55% categories increased. Now, if we take April compared to February, only 21% of the categories has increased their sales, while 79% of the categories decreased their sales. And one example I want to show you is the graphic for the category beer. And here we can see the sales in Brazilian reais. And so in February, we are still doing good, actually the Carnival months. But suddenly in March, we had 30% drop on sales, which is too much losses. In April, we have recovered a little bit. So if we take the peak and to the valley, the difference is 30%. Now, the company has worked, or most of the company, they have worked with their prices, and their profitability went up and down trying to make promotion, and actually they came with their prices down in order to offer their product. So although we had increase from March to April, the throughput dropped dramatically. The throughput, which is the margin provided for these companies. The inventory of beer went up, and then it came down roughly by, again, 30% on the supermarkets. And we use the concept of OSA, on-shelf availability, and the on-shelf availability, of course, has increased because we didn't have sales for beer. So this category was a category very impacted. Toilet paper, on the contrary, they have suddenly a growth on sales on March, so we couldn't see, and the OSA shelf availability went down, well, on April, then we have a significant drop. So the profitability went up, but now they have too much inventory, and the throughput also went down regarding this product. So I'm trying to show you the ups and downs that we have because of consumer behavior. And then we put together the best categories in blue and the worst categories in red. So we can see that the best categories altogether increased their sales in 2.5%, while the worst categories dropped 10% on sales. And here is the margin of these companies. Although the product best sellers, they are trying to get their margin, but it's not enough to get the same level of the throughput the retailers are used to get. So although the profitability from the bestseller went up, the loss of the other products didn't compensate the losses. So the inventory and OSA for these products, of course, went down, the worst performance, and inventory turns, again, on March for the bestseller was higher and coming down on April. This is just to give you an idea. Well, now the new constraint, so for the manufacturer, the constraint used to be the bottleneck. For retail, the constraint used to be the traffic. But I think if we go back to step one to identify the constraint, the new constraint is cash for manufacturer and for retailers. And then we have different ways to exploit the constraint. And in this case, retailers must increase availability while reducing inventory. So in order to do that, two important metrics are needed: OSA, on-shelf availability, and inventory turns. If we increase inventory turns, it means that we are increasing the return on the invested capital. So manufacturers must provide higher on-shelf availability and higher inventory turns to the retailers. We can see here it's not as today. This is from a couple of years ago, but it's important to show you that different retailers, they can have high availability and high inventory. So in the upper right quadrant, we have the best performance retailer. Sometimes the largest retailers, they don't have the best performance because they have enough money to keep cash, to negotiate price, but they don't have the best performance on inventory or availability. So this is one category for one. There are categories for one chain, and we are seeing here there are some categories that are providing a better on-shelf availability and a better inventory turns. Beer, for example, they offer high inventory turns but low on-shelf availability. So the manufacturer in this example, I want to take pasta. So for pasta, this particular chain, they have 8 suppliers. So from these 8 suppliers, the supplier that they are buying the most, they offer significant inventory turns, but not the best availability. So they have one smaller supplier which supplies a better inventory turns and better availability. So in order to save cash, companies should always be working with a supplier that would offer high availability and high inventory turns. So to finish my presentation, to avoid costly mistake in preparing your supply chain to this recovery, retailer must share daily inventory and sales data with manufacturer. Retailer must negotiate contracts for 3 or 6 months based in unit price instead of opportunity purchase. And retailer will measure on-shelf availability and inventory turns, because it's very easy to have availability if we have too much inventory. So we must measure manufacturer on these 2 metrics. And of course, manufacturers must offer 3 or 6 months contracts on unit price, and manufacturer must replenish according to the actual demand, deliver weekly according to the actual demand. And then this is the concept of pool. So the retailers sharing information with the manufacturers, and the manufacturers doesn't need any history data because they are going to replenish the actual demand. So in the way that the history doesn't work, is the history is meaningless for the current day, then the rule must be changed. So the retailers share their data to manufacturers, and manufacturers will be responsive to the actual demand. So concluding, if the constraint is cash, then inventory turn is the decisive competitive edge. That's what I had to present for you. Thank you.
Miguel,
Yes.
there's a question coming in specifically to you. Could you please provide a better explanation of OSA?
Okay. On-shelf availability, actually, that was a indicator created by Nielsen Corporation. They have defined some formulas that what you have expected to sell, let's say for the next week, and if you have this product available according to that expectation, and this expectation is basically the sales from the last week for the next week. So if you did some sales last week and you are expecting this sales for next week, this is an expected sale. So if you have product to attend these expected sales, then you have a higher on-shelf availability. This is a algorithm known by the retailers, and Nielsen statistics is using this kind of indicator to their clients. So we are using the same indicator. OSA is very important to have high on-shelf availability, but of course you cannot increase availability and increasing inventory. We have to increase availability and increase inventory turns. That's the concept.
Miguel, thank you very much. This is Rocco again, everyone. Again, if you have any questions, please keep asking them. We ask you to put them through the chat box and identify the speaker or speakers you would like to answer the question. So, Miguel, thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Next up is Yaniv Dinur. Yaniv is the CEO of Progressive Labs and the chairman of Progressive Flow. I think I might have had flipped those around, but regardless, Yaniv is one of those supply chain experts who works at various points around the world, including the Far East, including Europe, and he's going to share his observations of what he sees coming in supply chain behavior. That's hopefully going to give you, again, we want to give you a lot to think about of how you can strategically leverage your abilities going forward. Thank you, Yaniv.
Thank you, Rocco, and good evening, all the folks from the Far East. Good afternoon, good morning to the US people. Very happy to be here with you. So, hello everyone. I'm turning off my video so you can not be bothered for my Corona look. Okay, so like most of the presenters here, I'm coming from TOC. I used to work with Dr. Goldratt for many, many years, and then for the last 2 decades, this is what I do. And we can talk hours about constraints of companies, okay? And I believe most of the people sharing this WebEx heard about it or even experienced that. But my question many times, and it was a question that also Eli was dealing with, it is, what is the constraint of a human being? What is the constraint of us as managers, as people? And I can hear many answers to this question. Is it time? Is it our personal capabilities? I believe that each one has his own answer. What Eli came with an answer that I think it was amazing and a real breakthrough was that it's all kind of fears. Eli talked about 3 fears: about fear from complexity, fear from the unknown, and fear from the tug of war because of conflicts in a company. And he developed very strong tools to deal with each one of the fears. But of course, we know that there are other fears from change, or fear from, I don't know. I believe that each one has his own fears. And in times like we are going through now, it's obvious that the fear is increased. Some of the people really going through hard time. People are firing workers. People that they don't know if they will have work or not. Cash is a huge problem. Supply chain is in a turmoil, and this increased level of fears may create a vicious circle that will create more and more mistakes, terrible mistakes. I believe that one of my colleagues, Alan Barnard, will talk more about it. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's obvious that the situation today may cause major mistakes that in the very challenging situation that we are in the supply chain may take us to really a vicious circle of consequences that will happen. And there is also the negative atmosphere that affects all of us, affects consumers, and affects manufacturers, and affects distributors. And in some cases, as I wrote here, for good reasons. Some of the people really are going through very hard times. But my message today, and I will try to do it in a short way, is more optimistic. I really believe that we are facing real opportunities to improve supply chain. The only risk is to miss these opportunities because we don't see them, and this is the subject of my message today. So can you please change the slide? Okay, so I will talk about two main phenomena and one tool that I believe we can give. And the first one is that supply chain will shorten. In the last decade, the supply chain became longer and longer, bringing parts and finished goods from anywhere in the world. The king was price. And we tried to do whatever we can. If we can bring it few cents cheaper, let's bring it from wherever it is. And it has a price. The fact that the supply chain was so long, and it means that all the reaction, the replenishment time was long. The batch or the minimum order quantity was high. And it brought a lot of limitation into the supply chain, but we find a way, everyone find a way to do it, because again, the price for product was the king. But I believe that the coronavirus crisis is going to change it. It's going to change it because I see more and more countries and big companies that I'm working with thinking about how to shorten the lead time and how to shorten the supply chain. I will give two examples. One example, it's written here, that the Japanese government is giving a very nice package for manufacturing to bring back manufacturing mainly from China back to Japan. Same is doing the Indian government. They allocate an area that is twice the size of Luxembourg. And it gives land to manufacturers that are willing to bring back manufacturing from other places back to India for a very, very low price of land with all the infrastructure already there. So it saves a lot of time from organizing point of view for manufacturing to bring back the manufacturing facilities back to India. And we will see it more and more. And this is a phenomenon that I would like to talk about it a little bit more in a second. Another thing that we will see that it's an acceleration of online shopping. Because if we had more and more young generation doing their purchasing over the online, and online commerce was very, very big, mainly with young people, the closure forced so many other people, older people, to use e-commerce. And I will bring some data in a minute that will show that there is a huge increase. We are accelerating this phenomena of online shopping. And again, it's a huge opportunity that we should not miss. And when I say not miss, is that I believe we have developed very, very strong tools to capitalize on these two phenomena that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about online commerce. The closure, as I said, brought many more families to e-commerce. The necessity to buy online accelerate the behavior change, which brought online commerce to all the people that hesitate to use it before. The common belief is that e-commerce eases the complexity of supply chain due to the fact that we are using less distribution point, and the tolerance time of the consumer is a bit bigger. So if we believe that if we don't have it on shop, and Miguel talked about it, okay, if we don't have it on the shelf, we will not buy the product, and we may even not buy all the package. In online, there is at least a perception that the tolerance time of the consumer is a bit bigger. Also, that is becoming shorter and shorter. And of course, we have the complexity of the last mile, which is very challenging. Now, for new online shops that will not give an excellent service, meaning good availability, coupled with relatively low inventories, they will not be competitive. They will lose their competitiveness, and they will be out of business. And this is where I'm trying to say that we have very, very strong tools to help online shops and online distributors to work with the minimum inventory needed and to have a very good availability of goods. And this is something which we can help a lot to in the online sector. Next slide, please. So about that, about the shortage of supply chain. What I would like to say is that the fact that we have a shorter supply chain is a huge, huge advantage, that if we will not use it differently, if we will not understand that behaving in the old paradigms that we had when the supply chain was very long and the big batches was there and the minimum order quantity was very big, and we will continue with the same behavior, with the same policies and norms and even tools, we will not get any advantage. The fact that we took out some of the biggest limitation, the long supply chain, the long replenishment time, the big batches, doesn't mean we will enjoy the benefits if we will use it the same. The company must find what is the new model of operation, and when this limitation was diminishing, and what new policies and new norms and new behaviors, and maybe most important, new tools should be used in order to really enjoy and really benefit from the change. And by the way, in order to understand what need to be changed, we must understand what rules help us to accommodate the limitation we used to have beforehand. And then again, using the old paradigm in the new reality is essential in order to really enjoy the advantage of shorter lead times. And I really urge companies not only put so much effort in shortening the lead time, but also understand that they need to operate differently. And this brings me to the last slide I have. So can you go please to the last one? And this is how we can help. And I believe that in TOC we develop the right policies, the right norms, the right KPIs, if you want, how to change behavior of people, and again, very, very strong tools to help to make the change. TOC can help manufacturers not only in shortening the production lead time, and by that solving the desperate need for protective capacity in order to cater the changes in demand and the dramatic changes that may be also in supply, and to improve synchronization between variability and uncertainty in demand and supply, and overall increase the company's throughput. And using these tools, using these methods will help a lot. And again, the tools we have developed using deep learning, artificial intelligence, and strong visualization helps planner, managers, and supply chain specialists to improve inventory turns dramatically and to much better synchronize manufacturing to real demand. Thank you so much, my friends. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Okay, Yaniv, thank you. This is Rocco. Jennifer, did you see any questions that would be immediate right now? I didn't.
No, not right now.
Okay. All right. We are paying attention to the chat questions, and we will get them answered for you, but we'd like to keep going with the speakers. Before we get going to the next one, it looks like our attendees have leveled off. I want to make a statement that in doing the final preparations for this, I realized that all our speakers are men. We're not necessarily all near the same age, but it certainly was no intent to exclude any type of diversity in our panel, and I'll just apologize for that. Like I said, this was put together as an offshoot of what's going on in preparation for our virtual conference. We thought it was an important message to get out to the world, and we offered it to the world as a collective group here, and that was the only intent. So no intent to offend anyone, and I certainly apologize if anyone is offended. So on to our next speaker. My proud to say my co-author, Henry Camp and I co-authored the book with Ellie Shargenheim. It was released last year, doing very well. Thank all of you who have bought a copy of the book that lets it do very well. It's called Throughput Economics, and that book is actually, it's based on being able to make decisions that are based on profit, not driven by historical economy principles and the like. And it's a very eclectic book. It tackles that subject from many different angles. Anyway, I enjoyed that 2-year process with Henry and Ellie in writing that book. Henry is going to now throw some real world experiences here and his involvement in supply chains from being a supplier and a facilitator within the supply chain. And that's why we asked him to be here, not just because he's a friend of mine that we wrote a book together, but his supply chain experience. So Henry, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rocco. I'm just introducing myself briefly, and like Yaniv, I'll turn off the camera and save you from having to look at me. But I do want to say that my business experience is based on running businesses, and so we are actually in the trenches, dealing with the COVID, applying for PPP loans, doing those types of things to try to survive. So hopefully I can help you a little bit here. Let me turn off my camera. And there we go. And go ahead and go to the next slide if you don't mind. As both Miguel and Yaniv just mentioned, we have long supply chains. And we do it, of course, as they've said, to get low prices. But a consequence of that is that we have high inventories in the supply chain. They're at historically high levels. So let's just dig into that for a second, please. And I'm going to start talking, if you'll click ahead. So this is container departures as of the beginning of February, leaving Asia and the different parts. The top line is Asia. That's where most containers carrying finished goods, raw materials, et cetera, are leaving. And if we'll click into that one, go ahead and click again, please. You'll see me drill into Asia and specifically into China itself. So this is that. The first one was all the different parts of the world. This is just Asia. The top one in the Asia group is China. So you can see that there's a monkey wrench coming in the supply chains. It's not yet apparent at all. Right now, we're dealing with coronavirus illness and people in hospitals and worrying about giving it to each other and so forth. But what's not apparent yet, but is coming down the pike, if you is these containerized shipments are going to stop showing up from different regions of the world. So what we have here is China. Of course, then Italy's going to go bad, then Spain's going to go bad. So if you have a plant in any of those places, then the goods are going to stop coming in from that plant. But they're not going to stop. They're not going to be diminished in inventory until the inventory that was already present at this point gets consumed. That's going to be this summer sometime. So if you think you're okay because you're not seeing any delays, then let's see what you would do. Go ahead and click again, please. So again, you'd worry about the present. And as you worry about the present, you've got these, you're going to then experience, maybe by blindside, these coronavirus raw material delays. RM stands for raw material in my diagram here. So, so we've got these delays, and plant gets somebody in it with sickness, and bang, the plant's closed. So if your domestic vendor's supply chain relies on something from that Italian plant, then you'll start to see these delays, as I mentioned, sometime in the summer. And there won't be just normal late shipments. This is raw materials that are persistently delayed. Go ahead and click again, please. They're persistently delayed, and at first you can just run something else, right? These persistent shortages go on. Click again, please. So, but eventually there's nothing else to run. all that it requires for a manufacturer is to be out of one raw material, and you can't run anything through that plant that needs that particular raw material. And eventually, as it says here, your business just grinds to a halt. And even if you have plenty of orders, you won't be able to sell anything. And then the money stops flowing in completely. And how long does anybody last in that scenario? So click again, please. So of course, what you do is you try to find some alternative raw material sources, and you do that urgently. And it takes time away from everything. Now, one more click, please. You start sourcing like crazy, but then this quickly goes wrong because purchasing doesn't have time to place the normal replenishment orders. One more click. And the shortages of items that are available in the supply chain start to happen. So we have items that if we had ordered them on time, we would have gotten them, but we didn't order them on time, therefore we don't have them. One more click. The whole department falls into chaos. They're completely overloaded. People hate chaos. The poor previously taken for granted purchasing folks start running out of even more raw materials, and then your plant only needs to be missing one item, and you're out of production, and business stops completely again. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. One more click. This forces you back to worrying about the present, and this is what I call an infinity loop. The reason that I call it that is because you just lap through it. This one is kind of an obvious one because the laps happen in short time frames. Some of them, like centralize my company's management or decentralize its management, might take a generation to make a lap around, and by the time the next people face the same situation, they've forgotten that it happened before. But this one's a quick one. We loop around this quickly, going back and forth, and it lends to the chaos. This is the problem that we have, and the question is what kind of if you're on the threat of bankruptcy, what's the injection that we do? How do we change this? How do we do that? And the solution, I think, is in something that we know in the theory of constraints world as dynamic buffer management. It's a solution that's widely implemented. Think of it as a automatic or artificial rather intelligence that automates your replenishment chores to the point that most people don't even have to pay attention to them at all. So all the left-hand side of this infinity loop is completely available to you. Go ahead and click again to the next slide. And I'll show you a little bit about what I mean. If the replenishment happens automatically, here's the typical pattern for most purchasing departments right now. They're 100% utilized. They spend most of their time on replenishment and very little on sourcing. Now, why is this? Well, it's because since World War II, there have been very little disruptions in our supply chain. So, of course, we moved to save money in the purchasing departments. And what used to be done with 10 now gets done with 6 and a few computers. 40 years ago, you had more well-paid professional purchasing agents and fewer clerks. Today, purchasing is more of an entry-level job. Go ahead and click again. This is what it would be after implementing some sort of dynamic buffer management approach. You can see that it multiplies by something like a factor of 6 how much time your people have to seek alternative sources or just lower prices and improve the quality. So these things are good at any time, but particularly right now. Not running out of the things that are available is key. And this is a mechanism to reduce the amount of work that you spend on replenishment and be able to devote that to sourcing. As Yaniv just mentioned, supply chains will be becoming shorter, less time from the time we place an order or from the time a consumer buys something until it gets until it is replenished by the manufacturer. So as we see this happening, it requires finding good local sources for all these different products that are interrupted in the supply chain. And this won't last forever, but you'll be amazed at how long it lasts. There's surges going through the supply chains now. I think the people making the toilet paper are finding that they don't need to run the plant at all right now. There's no demand for toilet paper. The people had to move into bigger houses to store the toilet paper they bought. And so maybe that's good for the economy a little bit. One more click to my last slide. It's just on me, so you can get off of it. I'll end it here. But this is in red, excuse me, in yellow down at the bottom, you'll see Camp's law. This is a case that we bought low prices for efficiency, but this is a place where we should be in doubt. And we really want to be effective. It's more important that we have product available to the supply chains, that when people place orders, that we're able to fill them. That's effectiveness. You can worry about your efficiency if you like, but I would never give up effectiveness for efficiency. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Okay, Henry, thank you very much. Again, keep your questions coming. I see many of you are using the question box. If you use the chat box, the speakers are able to see them now and preparing to give your answers. So our encouragement is to use the chat box, but we will get to as many as we can at the end of the session, and as long as you all want to stay and listen to these experts. So thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce Peter Bolstorff. I hope I said that right, Peter.
Absolutely.
Peter's Executive Vice President for Corporate Development for the Association of Supply Chain Management. I believe it's the world's largest organization of supply chain, whether the professionals, companies, participants, and all that. And Peter has a lifelong history of being an expert in supply chain. So we were very pleased and honored that he agreed to join us today. I can't introduce you. I don't want to take away your time. So Peter,
No worries.
Welcome and thank you.
Thanks. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of the listening audience. So I am a theory of constraints practitioner. I'm not an expert in that. I've spent a lot of time in the supply chain, and I want to just share, and then as my role, if you can advance the slide, please. My role at the Association for Supply Chain Management really focuses on our corporate community. It's probably 300 or so global 2000 firms, all of them, focused on how do I make my supply chain better. And just for definitional purposes for everybody, I'm a huge SCORE fan, was part of the SCORE development way back when with the Supply Chain Council. So when I think about supply chain, I think about plan, source, make, deliver, return, and enable from supplier to customer. So I want to get that out of the way. So I wanted to share with all of you is what are the lessons that we're learning from our corporate community based on early sensing of the COVID-19, how we're responding, and then how we think supply chain is going to be a leading factor in economic recovery. So I'm going to think about supply chain companies in two piles. The first pile is supply chain excellent companies, those companies who are leaders and have demonstrated that over time. And then I want to think about those companies that are laggards, those companies that have looked at supply chain less strategically over time. So I'm going to frame it on the supply chain leaders. So again, I have daily, weekly, monthly interaction with 1,000 or so leaders worldwide, again, across 300 companies. So I guess my data set would be anecdotal conversations from that. So here's what we know. The best supply chains, as we think about lessons from the COVID-19 experience, are going to really focus on 5 things. One is the idea is fully integrating risk management with synchronized planning. And I'll talk a little bit more about synchronized planning from a process orientation here in a minute. But let me tell you a story about that one. So we know that there were some retailers that were international, had an international footprint, that sensed the COVID in their demand signal in December in Asia. They were able to run AI and cognitive learning algorithms to run scenarios of how that demand was going to shape in January. They then incorporated that into their planning system in February and acted on it in March. And again, each month that cycles forward, they're able to look at things like how do I ship from a store to the omni-channel, e-commerce. And so the idea is that supply chain excellent companies exist today, and they're fully leveraging, digital tools and their processes to make a difference. The second thing that we know the best supply chains will do is to develop more effective public-private, collaboration. So there are examples out there, 3M and the N95 masks, in ramping up capacity at such an extraordinary rate. The idea that Medtronic and Foxconn in Wisconsin started manufacturing ventilators versus iPhones. The idea that public and private labs are going to work together on a collective plan for testing capacity in the U.S. And I think the pandemic has forced the idea around public-private collaboration, but I think there are going to be those supply chain excellent companies that actually start thinking about, if I'm a consumer electronics company, are there some critical care, global health supply chain items that I can actually have, on my product portfolio, in the case that another event happens. The third thing we know about supply chains, the best supply chains, is that they're really looking at rebalancing their global supply networks. So if I'm single source, or as my fellow colleague mentioned, that they've spent so much time focusing on the low-cost solution in Asia, they're going to be looking at how do I rebalance global supply networks, and the focus is not going to be on just low cost. It's a score metric category we call agility, and agility would be the number of days to be able to respond to an unplanned demand event. And how then do you start to rebalance your global supply networks with agility as a feature in your competitive advantage? So again, where in the world they get rebalanced is a big question. And then, of course, to be more agile, you're looking at more domestic sources of supply. The fourth thing we know about the best supply chains is that they're going to be updating their risk management playbooks for global health, again, pandemic or other health events. And they're also going to be thinking about climate change. So we have a significant conversation about resilient, sustainable, and circular supply chains going forward. As we take more responsibility or less responsibility around climate change, what kinds of risk events would happen in the future? And then how would we deal with that? Again, I just saw a spot on LinkedIn the other day about how China is creating sponge cities, where water is able to accrue, based on rains and rising seawaters, et cetera. So how do we start to think about updating risk management playbooks, not just for global health, but other, I'll call it, significant catastrophic events? And then the last one that I want to spend a little time in is companies are really doubling down on their digital investments. And it's not investing digitally everywhere. It's really finding time to focus those investments on the most important things that move the needle in performance. So if you advance the slide, please. So just in summary, the majority of our corporations, when we think about doubling down, have a digital transformation. It's just that none of them are standard or defined the same. And what we learned is that the COVID pandemic amplified the need, but it did not change it. And so the question that we've asked is, moving forward, what investments will make the supply chain more resilient, sustainable, and circular? So if you can advance the slide, let me just give you some highlights of what we've learned from our corporate community. So historically, we've thought about our supply chains in a very sequential, plan. How do we develop the right products, source them, make, deliver, return, and then how do we support them once they're in the field? And so, again, I'm an advocate of the SCORE model. I think every company that we've worked with has to have some kind of a process blueprint that mirrors the left-hand side of this graphic. Some foundational frame that that I can use to articulate, here's how my supply chain works today. The interesting thing on the left is we know that only about 30% of the functionality that a company owns in their systems are used. And so what we've seen companies do is, is how do I either re-blueprint or optimize blank blueprint, that we're actually seeing latent productivity come out as processes are adjusted to use the full capabilities of the systems. The other thing that's coming out of the left is an idea around how do I strategically prioritize the focus areas for my digital investments. So a couple of things, and I'll have a slide next that we'll talk a little bit about that. Where are we going? In the future, we see this shift from sequential supply chains to what we're calling concurrent supply networks. And in these dynamic relationships, the processes and capabilities needed to be able to succeed in this environment are a bit changed. So synchronized planning, how do we connect to customers? How do we integrate smart operations with sensors and advanced analytics, intelligent supply? So again, from the previous speaker is, as you see this COVID shift to having to do more sourcing activities, how do I integrate more intelligent supply tools to be able to do that? Digital development, again, let's go back to the swabs that we just saw, is, how do I, 3D print those swabs to be able to increase my localized supply? And then dynamic fulfillment. So how do I, from a fulfillment standpoint, be able to, in real time, be able to fulfill orders, either at a store, e-commerce, or drones, etc. So again, we see companies optimizing their blueprint on the left, taking advantage of latent productivity opportunities on using their systems better, and then really helping prioritize what digital investments that they want to make going forward on the right. So if you advance the slide, please. So just to share a little bit, so it's simple graphic, but it took 12 years to make. So I authored a book called Supply Chain Excellence, first published in 2002. And it was how companies were using the SCORE model to identify a list of changes that they want to make to their supply chain, and then implement those changes and then make an impact on the metrics. So what this chart is illustrating is what we know around 90 SCORE-based transformation programs across 30 companies, 6 industries. Again, this is a longitudinal study. What you're looking at is the list on the left really are the strategic focus areas that companies are using. So this would be a normalized list: demand management, forecasting, supply management practices, European advanced planning systems, etc. If you look across the focus area, the X is going to illustrate these are the metrics at a high level that are impacted in a good way based on the implementation of that particular focus area. The interesting thing is you start to look at it from a column standpoint is you can look at each metric and say which strategic focus area made the biggest impact on the metric. And so, so you can see, for example, if I'm really looking at improving my upside supply chain flexibility, then I really need to think about supplier flexibility, that whole concept around agility. And then how do I think about rebalancing the network? So you can see in this graphic why most people start with sales and operations planning or some form of planning, and how they integrates that with its tactics, because that particular focus area impacts 3 different metrics. Likewise, if you're focusing on total supply chain management costs and how do I take cost out, there's a couple of focus areas that in combination have the biggest impact there. And so again, connecting the dots is we know that our supply chain excellent companies today are making sure that their baseline blueprints are in place, that they're using the systems that they have to their maximum capability, that they're prioritizing the strategic areas that they want to invest in that have obvious payback, either in revenue, customer service or cost, and then they're investing properly in the right digital investments. You can go to the next slide, please.
That is the last slide.
That is like, okay, so thank you for that. So the last word then is, I think, for those of you in the listening audience, I think what you want to think about is, you know, have I optimized my basic process blueprint? Am I using the technology that I've invested in? Have I prioritized the areas where I want to invest digitally? And you know, have I got clear return on investments? So thank you. Cheers. Stay healthy.
Peter, thank you very much. There's a lot of information there to digest. I hope everyone sees the consistency of the messages being delivered here, and hopefully you're getting a lot of ideas on what you need to do to leverage your opportunities going forward. Next up, and keep the questions coming. We'll get to as many as we can, or as long as you're willing to hang out. Next, my privilege to introduce Dr. Alan Barnard. He is the originator, owner, developer, primarily within Goldratt. Why am I drawing a blank? Goldratt Research Labs. Jeez. I was there at the beginning of that. I should understand. So Alan has done significant work in developing various bodies of knowledge, primarily focused on the theory of constraints. Since we lost Dr. Goldratt, it's been Alan's been one of the leaders in continuing to advance the knowledge, and he's going to share that with you all today. So Alan, thanks for joining us. The session's yours.
So just as an introduction, as Rocco said, my name is Alan Barnard. I'm CEO of Goldratt Research Labs, and we have the privilege of working with organizations around the world, both private and public sector, to identify what are the main avoidable and consequential mistakes they can make, and to come up with the simplest, lowest cost, lowest risk way of avoiding these. So it's a great privilege to share some of these insights that we've gained, not just during this crisis, but also in previous. So to start off with, just three big mistakes that we can make. The first one is when we think that something will never happen or never happen to us, we don't prepare. I want to make it very clear. I've seen a lot of people in the press talk about this COVID-19 crisis as a black swan. It is not a black swan. It was a white swan, and that is Nassim Taleb's words that wrote the black swan as well. This is the third coronavirus that we've had in 3 decades. The previous ones had about 10,000 cases each, about 1,000 people that unfortunately passed away. We were just unlucky with this one in that the virus remains asymptomatic for about a week or 2, and during that time it can spread dramatically, whereas all the others, you become symptomatic or almost immediately, and it's very easy to quarantine people through social distancing and wearing masks. So this was not a black swan, it was a white swan, and we were not prepared. We could have been prepared. The second big mistake that we make is when we think that something is impossible to achieve, something that looks like a very ambitious target, we often don't even try. The ability to survive and capitalize on this crisis is such an ambitious target. And I want to encourage you to try and hopefully the strategies that we've shared during the session will help to prepare you for how to not just survive, but also to thrive. And then the last mistake that we can make is often when a crisis happens, we end up having to break the rules in order to get out of the crisis. Things that we would never have done suddenly becomes the only logical choice, the only rational choice. Suddenly we start sharing buffers. Suddenly we figure out ways of achieving something that normally takes us months to do in a couple of days. But then the big mistake is when the crisis is over, we go back to use the old rules again. And we never for 1 minute think about the fact that what if these new rules that got us out of the crisis, if we had used them all the time, could they have helped us to prevent the crisis in the first place? A simple thing that I think all supply chain practitioners will have some experience in is You know, when a customer phones up and say, I want 1,000 of your widgets, normally the salespeople try to convince them to take 2,000 by offering them a special discount, etc. But when you have a shortage and suddenly that same customer phones in and says they want 1,000, you immediately ask them, how much do you really need right now? What if we shipped to you 250 a week? Would that be okay? But then, of course, the crisis is over. You go back to trying to convince them to take 2,000. Why not use those rules all the time? Why not use this as an opportunity to really convince all of our supply chain partners to switch more over to a demand-driven basis? So that's just a brief summary. What I'm going to do in the presentation, I've got about 10 minutes or so remaining. Just going to share with you briefly what are the recovery scenarios that we've been modeling with our clients using advanced simulation models to help them understand what those scenarios are. But also, secondly, what is the operational and financial impact of each of those scenarios? And what are the mistakes that we can make? And are there simple strategies to avoid those mistakes? So those are the 4 things that I will cover. So what are the possible scenarios? We've given them letters of the alphabet, right? So V represents this light green, which basically represents a fast and quite a relatively full recovery in terms of the demand on the organization. Recovery, but still a full recovery to what you were before. L is the scary one. That is essentially no recovery or substantially less demand than what we've previously held. And then the J part is a kind of a 2x or 3x recovery, is that there's something that happened during the crisis that got us to dramatically pivot, and now we can fully capitalize on it, and we can take our business maybe to the next level, or our organization to the next level. So a couple of weeks ago, I sent out a poll both via LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And we asked, the first poll asked, whatever organization you work with, which of these do you think most likely represent what will happen to your organization? And as you can see from the numbers, there were about 60% of people thought that this would be a slow but full recovery. There were some that thought it would be fast, some that thought they wouldn't recover, and a small percentage of organizations that they thought that they could somehow capitalize on this. Maybe suddenly people realize the importance of some product or service that they provide, and in future they'd be able to sell more, or maybe even get premium prices for these products. The second poll was, what about you as an individual, your own career? Whether you are an employee or whether you're a manager of a company, or even you run your own business. And we asked the same question, what would be the change in demand? And then, as you can see, some important differences. Many more thought that they would end up with an L shape, that they would be left severely worse off than before the crisis. And those are the things that's really worrying, is you can understand why so many people are going through serious a mental health crisis at the moment, and why the unemployment rate, I think the numbers are being released today. It's the worst it's been in a very, very long time. I think the contraction in the GDP for UK, apparently today they announced it's the worst it's been in 300 years. So terrible situation. And we see that happening in many different industries. Some of the previous speakers have shared some, Miguel have shared some. This is, for example, you see these shapes of recoveries in the same passenger car industry, but different patterns of recoveries and different impacts it would be. What I will share now is just one of the simulations that we've done for one of our customers. It's a company that has about $600 million in sales and about 60 million in profit, so very healthy profit, about 10% net profit, which is one of the best in their industry. And all that we did was we looked at, great, so what could be the likely outcomes if it happened as a V, U, L, and J shape? And we changed the numbers that they had in place for both their revenues, but also the costs on a monthly basis, and wanted to see what the impact would be of this on their financials. So the V shape would end up reducing their revenues by about 18%, the U shape 23%, L shape 41%, J shape 13%. And you can see the impact on that on the revenues. But now you can see the impact it will have on the net profit. The worst case scenario, L shape, will take them from +10 to -11 in net profit. The best case scenario, J-shape, will get them back to only about 4%. So we explored some options there for them. For example, if they made a substantial change in their product mix, and as well as to focus more on time-sensitive markets rather than price-sensitive markets, they could probably get their average selling price up by about 10%. So 10% of the 525 is another 50 odd million that will drop to the bottom line. So there is a possibility that they could actually end up in a better position than what they started if they were willing to explore the numbers. A big thing to note here that we're always calculating is how much cash runway these organizations have got. This is not just important for a startup, it's important even for the biggest companies. You could be highly profitable on average, but run out of cash during a crisis like this when your demand collapses down to zero. So very important to know what the cash runway is. It's also important to know your stock levels. So somebody would be reporting, I've got 30 days of stock. But during a pandemic, that 30 days of stock could be 3 days of stock. So you constantly have to update those demand forecasts in order to calculate how much coverage do we really have in all the critical items that we've got. So what are the big mistakes that we can make? And we've got limited time today, but I've included this in the slides. This is a framework I've developed to help our clients think through the types of key decisions that they can make and what are those decisions, and then what are the avoidable decision mistakes they can make and how best to reduce those avoidable mistakes. So 3 types of decisions. Planning decisions are decisions we make before we start the work. Execution decisions, decisions while we're doing the work, and measurement and improvement is decisions we make after we've completed the work. So the first big decision in planning is how do we allocate resources and buffers to reliably meet demand at the lowest cost? Then how do we make reliable commitments and prioritize the release of work? Should we change priorities? Should we expedite, use a fast track option? Those are all execution decisions. Should we batch to achieve efficiencies or not? What should we measure, what not? And finally, when and where we should make improvements or changes and investments. So I want to focus just on a few of these mistakes. So in the allocation of resources or buffers, the biggest mistake is when you have self-imposed demand, when you're offering clients a discount and that artificially causes a demand spike, or you create a feeling of scarcity and get people to overreact and buy way too much than what they need. So during a crisis, it's like that rule that I mentioned, is when they phone back to say, look, you're ordering 1,000, we noticed that you've never consumed more than 200, you really need more than 200. That can help to reduce some of those demand volatility that's often self-imposed. And then the other part is the misallocation of resources based on demand forecast or local buffering. You know, we have all the tools available today that we can dynamically allocate resources and make sure that we are aggregating the buffers. One of my friends, she's a top virologist in New York, and she mentioned to me that the shortages that they suffered from in PPE, personal protective equipment, dates back to a decade ago when the last coronavirus hit, and they just never maintained those buffer levels. They didn't aggregate them. They were localized, etc. So those are type of mistakes. In the making of commitments, you should always consider the backlog. If there's no backlog, you could potentially respond much faster. If there's a big backlog, you'd have to change the times that you're quoting your clients. So each of these, there's a specific mistake that people can make when it comes to this decision. And then there's a principle that we can use, and you'll notice the title at the top there is that principles are universal. Best practice also applications are specific. So demand driven, focusing on flow, that's universally applicable to everybody. Focus on the flow, make sure that you are only supplying based on what's really being consumed. Make sure you don't waste your resources to push it downstream when you could have kept it in an aggregated way and only dynamically allocated based on what the real need is. So each of these things, and again, as I mentioned, we've got limited time, but you can have a look at each of these. What is the mistake that you can make? And often the mistake is that we consider the local impact and not the total impact. As Henry, for example, mentioned, is that we look at purchasing far away because it will save us $1 per unit, and we buy 1 million of these, so we assume we'll save $1 million. But we should have considered what the total cost impact is of buying somewhere where they are 3-4 months away. I have to pay upfront compared to maybe buying locally. So that's where the simulation modeling part comes in very importantly, because we can measure the total impact of local decisions and see, is it a good idea or not? And really abolishing all these local efficiencies that are often just distracting us because it's generating a lot of noise, and really focusing those continuous improvement efforts on where it really matters. And a very important part that I'll share later is dynamically resizing buffers. It's a really important one, not just stock buffers based on what's really happening on the demand, but also time buffers, capacity buffers, and cash buffers. We should constantly be looking at, do we have sufficient protection against the possible risks that we are incurring? One of these mistakes, I think some of our speakers might have referred to that as, this is your company situation. You've got pretty good lead times, your reliability is exceptional, throughput is great, but then this vicious cycle is triggered and you think that we should be okay. But what happens is you quickly get into chaos when the demand exceeds the supply. And when it gets to this above 80% levels, we all know it, that the lead times will grow exponentially, your reliability will drop, and your throughput will even start dropping. So it's really critical to stay away from these vicious cycles of people panic buying, over ordering. That causes overproduction on the suppliers. That triggers longer lead times. Those longer lead times will update my min-max stock levels, which will trigger larger replenishment orders and cause me to overorder even more on a system that's already constrained. So really the recovery part, we have to be very careful. We have to work closely with our suppliers and our customers to build up stock levels to prevent everybody's replenishment orders to be triggered and then these massive orders. Because what often happens is that the demand then spikes up, the suppliers panic, they bring in a lot of capacity, and just when they've got that new capacity deployed, suddenly the orders dry up and it returns to where they would normally. Or the opposite action is that the retailers or distributors panic, they stop ordering completely, the suppliers, manufacturers panic, they start cutting out capacity, laying off people, stopping production lines, and just when all of that is done, the consumption comes back to normal again and people start placing normal orders again, and suddenly they don't have the capacity to supply. And that's where a massive amount of market share could be lost. And that's what they always say is most market shares are gained and lost during crises like what we are facing at the moment. So I want to end off with just a really useful framework. I mentioned Black Swan. Nassim Taleb wrote this amazing book called Anti-Fragile, and he said it's important to look at systems, whether it's an organization, a person, or country, not as whether they're effective or efficient or compliant, but rather to look at how they would cope with stresses onto them, both positive and negative stresses. And he came up with a very useful classification of, is a system fragile, robust, or anti-fragile? A fragile system is harmed more by losses than what it benefits from equivalent gains. So a single person business, for example, if suddenly the demand goes up too much, maybe 50%, they've got limited gain because they've got a capacity constraint. But if they lose 50% of their business, they could potentially go bankrupt. So they hurt much more by a downturn or failure than what they benefit from an equivalent gain or upturn. A robust system doesn't really care. It's equally harmed by a downturn or an upturn, and over time it just balances out. But an anti-fragile one is one that has figured out the rules to protect itself against the downturn, but fully capitalize on the upturn. And I think that's an important concept to take forward, is to say, how can we learn from this crisis? We have to be prepared. We need to put in policies where we can work very closely with our supply chain partners to identify and simulate what are the scenarios that can happen to us. The fact that we can't predict when it will happen doesn't mean it won't happen. What are those scenarios? what would be the financial impact, and how can we work together to protect ourselves against them if they're the worst case, but also how best as a supply chain to capitalize on it if we are lucky that crisis caused a dramatic increase in demand. The second part is sharing our end product sales. I think a number of the speakers have mentioned this, as we have no longer any excuse not to do that. We need to get everybody onto demand driven so that when a product is consumed by a consumer, that signal should be sent to everybody so that we can all track what's really happening on the demand side rather than keep on pushing based on forecast that was based on previous assumptions. And the other part is to have a single priority system, to have these buffers that are dynamically adjusted all the time. Here are examples of these demand-driven and theory of constraints-based algorithms that can happen automatically. So you can see during a stable demand pattern, the buffers would stay about the same. If you are launching a new product, it would start off very high and very quickly stabilize down to lower levels. If there's a demand spike that maybe those that have experienced in the PPE or those that manufacture ventilators and others, these dynamic algorithms would automatically detect that the demand is much more, or that the supply is taking longer, and automatically increase target stock levels. And once the crisis is over or the demand spike is over, it would automatically go down. So that's kind of the message I want to leave you with, is that I mentioned be prepared, work with everybody. And here just an issue around, there's a lot of things that are not known at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainties. But these only really matter if it will change how best to solve, resolve, cope with, or capitalize on the situation. We know, regardless of these unknowns and uncertainties, what is the best way to move forward, both as an individual, wear a mask, wash your hands. Those are the things that, regardless of many factors around this pandemic that we don't yet fully understand, are good strategies to follow. In the same way as the supply chain, there's many unknowns and uncertainties, but we know the mistakes that we can make, and there are simple principles that we can apply to avoid these mistakes. And then the last one is, when demand exceeds supply, of course, we should find the bottleneck and make sure that we don't waste its scarce capacity. But when that demand is growing exponentially, at the same time, we should be looking at starting to look for more bottles, elevating that, and looking at all the various options that we've got available to try and get more of that scarce resource. So I hope that was valuable. I'll hand back to Rocco to find out if there's any questions on the slides.
Alan, thank you. So now with Jennifer's help, we're going to present the questions. I first want to let the audience know, and Jennifer, if you could do it that way, I don't misspeak. I personally know a lot of people who registered for this session that could not make it today, but it is going to be recorded and offered again. Jennifer, could you let our audience know what their access to the recording is?
Yes, Rocco, absolutely. So as Rocco mentioned, today's recording has been done probably within the next couple of days. If you are a member of the TOCICO, then of course, as a member, you will always have access to any of the past conference videos or past webinars through your member access. If you're joining us today, however, as a guest and you don't have a membership, of course, I'll be happy to provide you with information. However, what we're going to do between now and the time of our virtual conference in June, we'll make this recording available through GoToWebinar, and that will just be for a very limited time, so you'll be able to access it and re-listen to it if you'd like. Within the next couple of days, you will receive an email from us, so please look for that. It'll have the information on how you can access that recording. So good.
Okay, any other maintenance item right now before we get to the questions, Jen?
Well, I just want to mention, Rocco, because some of the speakers in today's presentation, just as well as this topic in general, we're going to be having some of those speakers back and the topic back at the virtual conference. And so what we're going to do is send out a message to all of you attending to provide a VIP code and kind of give you a little bit of extra incentive if you're interested in that conference to join us. Aside from that, I can open up the questions, and all the speakers at this time, if you could all please maybe open up your mics as well, you're more than welcome. We've been sharing your questions as the presentation's been going along when you've directed it to a specific speaker. So I'm going to go ahead if that's all right. If anyone would, any of the speakers would like to make comments, you've seen some of those questions come in. I'll just give it a second for you to do that before I bring up the first question.
Okay, my only concern is we have quite a few questions. Most questions could be a seminar in itself. So if we can give the answers pretty direct and brief, and the questioner can also always follow up with us if you need a more detailed answer, then we'll direct you to the speaker. So Jen, where's the best place to start with this? The question box or the chat box? What would you like to do?
Well, most of the questions have come through the question box, so I'm going to start with one that is coming from John Ricketts, and it's to Yaniv. Yaniv, John is asking, when you predict more online commerce, are you expecting higher volumes to existing information systems, or do you anticipate innovations in online commerce? And if so, what would those innovations be? And I will open up John's mic, Yaniv, just so that if dialogue is going to take place, that we can add that in. So.
Okay, John, I'm going to be very, very brief here. I believe that most of the innovation in the e-commerce is in the last mile segment. And you can see drones bringing you the goods and all this kind of very nice innovation. I think there's not enough innovation in the backbone of the supply chain. And this is the big issue for me. And I think this is where we can really give huge advantage to all these new and also present online shops. I hope that I answered you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, next question, Jen.
Okay, we're going to have a question to Peter, and this is from Kathy Austin. She's asking if you could clarify what you mean by balancing and rebalancing supply chains, please.
Yeah, so the idea was balancing and rebalancing the supply network. And so if you think about looking at your supply base, and I think it was mentioned a couple of times, if you've set low costs, and high volume for a single source or a dual source supplier in Asia, I think as agility becomes more of an important competitive advantage, people are looking at saying, well, I have to balance my supply portfolio to have some low cost, some highly responsive, and so that may include a shift of geographic locations on where your sources of supply. I think right now today, if you got burned because you only have one source of supply and it happens to be in a risk area, everybody right now is looking at how do I shift that balance. That was the intent.
And Peter, if I can second you on that, because I saw a question to me about price per unit and how to measure it and how to do it and so on. I totally support what you just said. Agility is the most important thing. And I many times ask my customers, this specific product costs, I don't know, €1. Is it expensive or very cheap? And the answer is, if you sold it yesterday, if you sell it tomorrow, it's probably very cheap. But if you will sell it in 2 years from now, it's probably extremely expensive. So by buying cheap, it doesn't mean that it's really cheap. And agility is the most important thing at the moment.
Right, and I just want to play off a couple of Alan's charts at the end of his presentation. And again, as you start to look at different, demand responses and buffers, having an agile, rebalanced supply network will allow you to be more dynamic in how those things get filled. That allows you to respond to, again, a more consumer-oriented, demand shift or demand profile. So, yep.
Thank you both.
Maybe just a comment from my side is, I think the idea of dynamically resizing, your stock buffers, your time buffers, so the quoted lead times, but also the capacity that you've got to stay out of that chaos zone where one or more of your resources is just too overloaded, and all that will happen is your lead times will start growing exponentially, reliability will drop. So constantly just rebalancing, as Peter was saying, what is really happening to on the demand side, and then rebalancing that with what capacities you've got, what times you quote, what stock levels you maintain, and also the cash buffers that's really critical to not allow, as Miguel said, your cash to become a constraint.
You know, one of the comments, and again, listening to my colleagues on the panel, and it went back to that public-private collaboration. I think if you were to look at thinking about capacity as a buffer, and do I make product A or do I make critical care item B? I think there's going to be a lot of people that are learning that I could actually have in my risk management playbook the ability to shift what I make, you know, depending on the risk events, and actually then fully utilize that capacity. So again, one of my takeaways there is that would be a great subject of another book for one of you fine gentlemen. Is how to think about product portfolio management as a potential buffer or leverage of capacity.
Great point. Great point. That's that would have been much better said on one of my opening slides about what are you capable of doing. Whatever I said there in the beginning, that's product portfolio management. There's a much better way to put that. Thank you, Peter. Jennifer.
Yes, Miguel, this question is coming in to you from Pedro, asking if we shall work with real demand rather than forecasting, how to control demand or control and manage, operationally talking, variability of customer demand in this uncertain period.
Okay, well,
now Pedro's microphone as well.
Yes, I think it is. Okay, it's open, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Pedro, your mic is open.
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So we understand about uncertainty that we are going in. It takes us to the dynamic buffer, which means according to the demand, we must create the buffer, the right size, and to place the right order to the suppliers. I'm trying to say that the forecasting are based on historical data. And for this time, with the change on customer behavior, we cannot use historical data no longer. This will take us to a disaster. So this is the way that we actually, these rules existed. The technology existed all the time, but we didn't adopt this technology. I would say this is a kind of we were having. Sorry?
No, just okay. I am just following you. Yes, okay. So that means that we have to have the whip effect, you know, about forecasting. So the goal is to reduce the whip effect.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Let me provide
please.
some translation for anybody who's not a TOC expert out there. There are two concepts here that we're talking about. One of them is in the case of supply chains, we're talking about physical inventories. That is basically a buffer. So we haven't really defined our terms, but a buffer is an amount of a quantity of inventory or a number of hours of work that's available, or a certain amount of cash that you have to spend. However you want to think about it. Let's talk about supply chains and inventory buffers in units of stock. That is basically an aggregation of both the forecast demand, what might be needed, and the supply chain's actual behavior. How upstream, how fast am I getting more stuff? And if I get stuff more slowly, then my inventory shrinks up because of the supply chain being more slow to respond. And if the demand picks up, then it might shrink even more. The object of the game is not have my hands clap, right? That's the object of a buffer, is to shock absorb, if you will, fluctuations in supply chain. The bullwhip effect that he just mentioned it's a great point, but it's little inputs over here on the supply chain at the demand end come sort of propagate in waveforms that get bigger over here on the production end. So you could have a small diminished demand at consumption level that might turn into the plant shutting down on the production level, and then the demand recovers, which typically is what occurs, and then the plant's not prepared. Alan talked about this quite a bit, but those are concepts that we're all familiar with, and some of the people on the webinar may not know. So there's a little definition for you. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. That question did come through. There are some people that are new to TOC and looking for that kind of insight. Very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to show the next question. This is to anyone on the panel from Andrew K. Hi, Andrew. He's asking, can you differentiate between protective capacity and excessive capacity that is usually regarded as waste, and waste is to cost to be eliminated?
I'll take that one. I think that curve that I showed, which is for a single resource or for a combination of resources, it doesn't really matter. What defines the difference between protective capacity and excess capacity is whether you are outside of that chaos zone. So that's a very simple way, is that you're monitoring your lead times. You're monitoring your reliability of making commitments, your level of availability, as Miguel said, your on-shelf availability, your due date performance. As soon as those numbers start going down, that's an early warning that you simply don't have enough protective capacity to absorb the variability in demand. So there's no precise formula to calculate it, and that's why the simulation models are so powerful, because you can simulate the various environments to find out, do I have enough protective capacity? In some cases, 20% protective capacity is more than enough. In other cases, 50% protective capacity is not enough, simply because the demand is very sporadic. You might get sporadic demand at the end of the quarter, and then you need to be able to react very, very quickly. So the best way to answer that question that Andrew is answering is essentially to simulate those environments and to see if you are staying in that edge of chaos zone, which I call, which is your reliability is great, your lead times are quite short, then you probably have enough. As soon as you go back to the stable environment, it means that you now have more than enough capacity. There's nothing in your inbox. But as soon as you're in chaos, you know that you just have pushed it too hard. You don't have enough protective capacity.
Thank you all. That's a very big thing, and I'll just throw in the caveat that your protective capacity may be someone else's needed capacity, and there's value there that you may have an opportunity to exploit in the market. Just to plant that thought. Next question, Jen.
Rocco, maybe just a quick point on that, something that everybody can relate to, is to say, if you think about a project environment and you say, how long will a one-day task take you, right? Well, if you have nothing to do, it will take you 1 day. But if you're 50% utilized already, it'll take you 2 days to get to it. If you're 90% utilized, it will take you 10 days to get to it. If you're already 99% utilized, which many of us are, it will take you 100 days to complete a one-day task. So the time it takes you to get things done, that's that lead time component. That's the best early warning system that tells you the system is now waiting for you, right? You don't want that. You don't want the system to be waiting for you. You don't want to become the bottleneck. No resource should become a bottleneck. Everything should be subordinated to effectively and efficiently meet the demand that's placed on that system. So monitoring the time it takes you to do something is a very fast way of checking whether you have too little or too much capacity.
Yeah. Thanks for that clarification, Alan. Thank you. All right, Jen.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if Andrew wanted to have any dialogue into that conversation. I have opened up his mic. I'll just wait for a second if Andrew has a comment. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
No real comment, except maybe one, and that is when you are in a stable environment, the current paradigm is really cost control. And when I'm talking about here, because early in the introduction, we're talking about protective capacity. What are we protecting? And we're in TOC, we're talking about the constraint in the flow within the system. But being efficiency driven, when we see excess capacity, we tend to want to reduce that and end up with a balanced type plant. And that's, I was thinking of maybe people new to TOC, whether we can just reflect on what does that mean, not necessarily with having the excess capacity or protective capacity where there is a shock, where there's a state of chaos arriving, but internally in a normal environment when we're just traveling in under normal situations.
Andrew, I would just expand your definition a little bit. The protection is not just there for protecting the constraint. The protection is there to protect your part of the system to reliably, efficiently, effectively meet the demand that's placed on it. And that's the check to do, is to say, am I able to, within a reasonable time and cost, can we meet the demand that's placed on my part of the system or my part of the supply chain? And like I said, again, as a quick way to do it is to think, if you have too much of a certain resource, take one away in a simulated environment and see what will happen. We've seen that happen often, you know, when the average utilization is below 50% of a specific resource. And I think it's a great idea to take one away, and it just pushes them over that 80% utilization threshold. And suddenly, you know, the lead time starts growing exponentially and reliability drops and throughput drops. So my recommendation is there is no precise formula. Simulation is the way to go.
But I'll say one thing, the more balanced the plant is, the more productive capacity it requires.
Absolutely.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrew.
Jen?
Yes, next question, someone's left, but I'm gonna just pull the question forward, ask that it be part of the recording. What will your thoughts, any of the panelists, what are your thoughts as far as post-COVID on the fashion world? What will that be like?
We'll be wearing masks, maybe. You know, that might be a good business to get into.
I think, let me just take a shot at that one. I think two things that we're seeing in, I'm going to call it consumer-oriented businesses. One is there an alternative for me to start thinking about apparel in the global health supply chain or global health space? So as you start to think about people who converted over to make masks, for example, that may become part of their future playbook. The second one is the idea on how do we invest in connecting to customers so I know which distribution channel to use in my omni-channel footprint, right? You know, how fast can I shift to go from a store to, you know, on demand or curbside or something like that. So those two, and I think that's apparel, but I also think it's food service. You know, again, think about all of your restaurants that are shut down today, you know, that have had to adapt to curbside pickup and those kind of things. So the third part was more customer loyalty programs so that you're able to communicate or connect with your customers on a little bit better. That's what we're seeing from that industry within our corporate space.
Thanks, Peter.
I'm just going to add the general comment that for the higher end of the fashion industry, where lead time is so important, or orders have to be placed seasons ahead, I don't mean multiple years, I mean within the calendar year, that this adherence to the discipline of demand signals and the supply chain working together and communication of the results can add significantly to the performance of that whole supply chain, from the raw material suppliers to the garment manufacturers, through the distribution centers to the retailers. So Miguel's and I forget who else issue of communication can significantly help, especially in that industry because of the long lead times and when ordering has to happen according to normal industry norms. That would be a huge significant help.
Rocco, just a comment from my side as well, as we've got one of our customers in high fashion, and one of the scenarios that we've modeled is the fact that when there was a crisis like this and people have really burned through their cash buffers or savings because there was no income, it normally takes that expenditure on luxury goods much longer to recover than what the general economy recovers, because people need to build up their cash reserves again. So every item that they don't have to buy, they're not going to buy. So I think that U shape, a very long U, is probably going to be what will happen in all the luxury good items. Anything that people don't have to buy, absolutely, probably they won't buy them for quite a long time, because they need to be rebuilding their cash buffers.
Agreed.
Just one more thought on that.
And overcome the fear.
Go ahead, Yaniv.
And I just said, and overcome the fear. The fear will hold them even after they will build the cash. Sorry, Yaniv, please go ahead.
No problem. In my experience with apparel supply chains, the drive to be able to get high margins are very necessary, because they have extraordinary expenses in maintaining stores, particularly in high streets in the big cities. Those stores can be crazily expensive, so that even with the high margins, they maybe barely break even in these stores where they try to build their brands. My experience was that if you guarantee the stores have inventory, what we saw was sales increases of 100%, same store sales increases year over year, and stable at 100%, not just for a short period of time, but for 6-9 months, something like that. Solid improvements. But when they try to apply it in the whole supply chain, then the rule to buy from the Chinese manufacturer, or the Vietnamese manufacturer, or the El Salvadoran manufacturer that has the lowest cost gets in the way, because shortages then come and much of the increases are lost. So the challenge I think that supply chains have to deal with is, on the one hand, let's say I buy from the low cost manufacturer 80% of what I predict I will use, and I'm going to spend some of my money with the fast response alternatives in my supply chain. Let's say I do that. Then I can make more money by shifting that to 90-10, but then I'm only slightly off in what demand's going to be. And events like this, the coronavirus trigger, are examples of external events, exogenous events that completely wipe out any sort of expectation of what will be consumed, as Rocco says, a season or two, 6 months, 9 months in advance. So you just can't know. But if you don't feed the fast response part of the supply chain that makes you anti-fragile, then you don't have them there, because if they've had no orders for the last 3 years, they won't exist anymore. So it's a very tough balancing act, is how much will I pay for some insurance against a future that I can't anticipate, versus how much will I be forced to try to improve profits this quarter for the annual report that's coming out.
Yeah, and I would like to add something. So in the fashion industry, as I was saying, they don't have the concept, or we don't use the concept for replenishing. So the manufacturers, they say, well, this is the amount we are going to produce, and I guess that we are going to sell, to push, and they are very happy that they sold all their collections 6 months ahead. And this is a very slow chain. The replenishment is most of the orders in a collection, they place one single order for each collection, for let's say one order for 6 months. And this is too slow to respond. And if the products are coming from China or from far distance, I suppose that even with the virus, they still had too many orders coming in, and they couldn't afford to, the chain didn't respond enough. So this is one of the segments most impacted with the virus, because there is no more events, no more parties, people are not buying, and we didn't have the right response from the manufacturers. So the responsiveness from the chain is one of the most important, I would say, for this category that is not robust, that is fragile. So I comment on it.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Jen,
Yeah,
next.
I'm gonna open up the mic for Kartik Modi. He's had several questions come in throughout the presentation, and I think with respect to this particular conversation you're having right now, some questions about specifically. So Kartik, are you there on the line? I've opened
Yeah,
your mic. Please,
yeah, thanks.
you have some specific questions here. If you could ask that, if it's for a particular speaker, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question I want to understand what is the meaning of cash runway and how do you calculate that, number one. And number two, all this discussion is happening on the cash buffer. When there is a very slow cycle of rotation of cash in the entire system, how do we manage the cash buffer as a company? I am not talking about the individual. Thank you.
So I presented the cash runway. I think it's just it's a term that comes from startups, but it basically says that you take all the costs that you have to incur every single month, and you divide your amount of cash that you've got by that amount. So if I've got maybe $500,000 in cash on hand, and my fixed costs every month is $250,000, those are the costs that's very difficult to get rid of. I have a cash runway of 2 months. It basically means I can survive not getting any revenue for about 2 months. Of course, the amount of months that my cash buys me is by how much I can reduce my costs by. So that's a concept that comes from the startup world. I think, but it's very useful in this environment. It's the same thing from a personal perspective, right? I have certain cash reserves in my bank. How long can I survive without any income? How many months can I survive? So it's a useful and a good mechanism is to say, if the crisis can last for at least 3 months, you need at least 3 months of cash reserves. If it can last for 6 months, you need probably 6 months of cash reserves, unless you can find a way of increasing your revenues or further reducing your cost during that time.
Thank you. But how different it is from cash buffer?
It's the same thing. It's just a runway. It's just a terminology that I use in startup world. It's essentially how much time do you have before you have to raise some additional money in order to keep your business trading, right? And that's true for startup as well as for big companies. How much time do you have to keep running your company if you don't have any revenues before you'll have to start borrowing money or getting investors to come in? Else you'd have to close down your company.
But Alan, it's nice because in times of crisis, it's cash at hand divided by burn rate, not taking into consideration what you have outside or what you project that will come in. So if something happened today, how much months you have to run? So it's a bit different than
Yeah, understood. So now we were discussing on the capacity and protective capacity. But today, the most important, the burning issue is the cash, how much cash we have, and how we can protect the cash, because the rotation is not happening. So how do we work to maximize the cash availability or cash generation? I will put it that way.
I have just a brief comment. I mentioned that the part of being prepared is to work with your supply chain partners. One of our clients said to me earlier this week, we can't afford, we want to be prepared, but we can't afford, because we don't have enough cash, generally speaking, not just now, to put in the requisite buffers. And what we had done is we had talked to their suppliers so that if they purchase a component or material from the supplier, and the variable cost for the suppliers may be 25%. If they are able to supply that to them at only the variable cost during a time when there's not enough demand, that customer can hold 4 times as much buffer than what they would have been able to do if they had to purchase that buffer component at the full purchase price. So there's always ways that you can work with your customers and suppliers to say, what can you do immediately to reduce the demand on your cash or to bring in additional cash? So can I negotiate with my customers to get them to pay ahead of time for something that we know they're going to take if they have good cash reserves? So that's the idea, is just treat that cash buffer or as a constraint, how to ensure you don't waste it and how to elevate it if necessary.
Okay, thank you. Can I have one more question if time permits?
Go ahead, Kartik.
Yeah, I want to understand about the concurrent network, what Peter talked about. Because according to me, it is the exchange is happening two-way or maybe multiple way from across. So how does it actually work, concurrent network?
Peter? Peter, are you still with us?
Rocco, I don't see Peter on the panelist. He may have dropped off. Maybe if anyone else could speak to that, otherwise we will move on to the next question.
The other speakers, Kartik, you're asking is one graph that showed a linear supply chain model from a one, right?
Yeah, I think that, in most environments, the linear supply chain models are not really current practice, right? For every part or component that I purchase, I normally have more than one option from which to purchase. So as some of the other speakers had mentioned before, it's just to have those agreements in place. So when you look at it, that every purchaser can have multiple buyers. So if there's more than one-to-one relationship between buyers and sellers in any system, then you have a network rather than a serial chain. So I think all supply chains today are really supply networks, right? And that's what we do when we do simulation modeling, is you're modeling that whole network, but then you have to specify the rules. When do I buy from one? When do I buy from another? Under what conditions? And you can model all those environments to see what's the best rules to use to protect the whole system.
Yeah, how it is different from ecosystem, because that is also working on the similar concurrent network and ecosystem work on similar. That is what I understood from whatever
I think it's two names for the. I think it's two names for the same concept, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark.
All right, Jen.
Yeah, the next question, I'm gonna open up the mic and also read off the question. This is coming from Raghavendra BS, and the question is to all panelists. With majority of industries perhaps maybe not exposed to TOC or to lean, how do we bring them out of this serious situation, especially at a tier 1 and tier 2 level? Very general question. Yaniv smiling. Yaniv, go ahead.
We are dealing with this for the last 20 years. So all the participants are part of this huge effort to do.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think that the difficulty is that many of the strategies are counterintuitive. For example, buy from a more expensive supplier. I don't want to buy from a more expensive supplier, so or buy later. Well, shouldn't I be buying earlier? All these kinds of questions are things that sort of make people question. The advantage of our approach is looking at the holistic system, not just the company, but the company's supply chain and the whole system, the broader system. And it's my sense that some of us will have to, and anybody who's an expert, I would encourage you to offer services for people so they don't have to learn. Right now, people are freaked out and they don't have time to learn. They have no interest in learning, even if what they would be learning would be hugely beneficial for them. So it's my sense that it's our obligation, those of us who understand what we've been talking about here, to offer services to people so that they don't have to learn. They can always learn later. We'll be happy to teach them later, but let them let them commoditize the flow solutions, let's call them, once they get tired of paying for the service. But right now, they certainly need to benefit from the service, and that has to happen more quickly than they can probably build the capabilities. So you reach out to people who you trust to help you do those things. That's my advice.
Henry, my response to that, I think something important to remember is that theory of constraints and lean, agile, all of these are applications. They have boundary conditions. They are principles that they are based on that are universal. And when there's a crisis, people get the principle, right? You'll see on the news, on CNN, the word bottleneck and buffer and flattening the curve. This has become common language now. So I think people now realize what they need to do. Theory of constraints, lean, etc., provide the how-to. They've got very specific rules that they can provide you with. How do you establish buffers, right? Where should the buffers be? So I think that the time has never been better for theory of constraints and lean and agile and all the methods now, because people realize that they need those things, but they don't necessarily know how to convert a principle. We know there's a bottleneck. How do I deal with it? We know we need a buffer. How best to put it in place? Where's the lowest cost, lowest risk way? So I suspect that the demand for knowledge around theory of constraints and lean and demand driven is going to grow exponentially, and we really have to, as a community, be ready to provide that. Of course, cash flows are very constrained at the moment. So one of the biggest industries that we picked up from our poll that's going to be suffering for a long time is the consulting businesses, right? Because it's considered a luxury item by many companies. They believe they don't absolutely need it. And as long as they don't know how long the recovery is going to last, they're probably not going to buy it. So we have to be innovative in terms of offering our services and our products to them at ways that has a small downside for them, in order to procure it, and a big upside for everybody if they get the benefit. So I think that's just my view on it, is that the time has never been better for us to make available our products and services and knowledge to the industry.
Great, thank you. I'm going to open up the mic for Nikesh Tart. The question, kind of general, asking anyone on the panel how to gain confidence from consumers that this supply chain management is really COVID-free.
Now, I need some clarity on that. Does he mean that the goods that come through the supply chain don't transmit COVID?
I'm not able to get, it looks like he's muted, so I'm trying to open up the mic. I guess we can, if anyone has just want to take an assumption. I guess, could you open your mic just to add some clarification? Okay, so we can move on. Next question, this is kind of on the lighter side of things. Moving to more e-commerce might also mean for some people, like, for example, an elderly neighbor who has fewer opportunities to socialize. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you socialize with
people
your
are figuring
FedEx driver and your UPS driver now instead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, it's people are figuring it out, right? Even older people now much more using FaceTime and Skype and Zoom to reach out. And I'm finding, people that I never used to see very often physically, I now see them much more often because it's so easy. It's become part of the normal way of engaging, of connecting with people, to say I don't have to be in a physical space with you in order to connect with you. I think the same breakthrough that happened with mobile phones, you don't have to be at a specific place in order for somebody to reach you. They could reach you while you were anywhere. I think that's the same thing, right? As we need connection. And we all have mobile devices, and there's no excuse. People can connect with you anytime. So I think the elderly will discover that the same way that we all need to be alone. We can constantly be connected with people.
I hope that Alan's right, but it seems to me that the suicide rate is rising very high, very quickly. And I think the change in suicides, and we're going to know this more as we look back and start to do some analysis on what happened to us back in the spring of 2020. But I think the increase in suicides is greater than the number of people that have died from the coronavirus. So certainly drug overdoses, I'm not including those in suicides, they're almost equally big, also increasing dramatically. I don't know, but we may find that the cure was worse than the disease. These are just things rolling around in my mind. I'm very concerned that that people need social interaction. I know that it's true that if you put somebody in solitary confinement, some people in the prisons will die simply from being not being exposed to other people. Not that they killed themselves, they just passed away. So this is something that we'll learn more about as we look back on this. But our best intentions are not always giving us the outcomes that we're looking for.
Henry, I think you're right. I think that society needs to look at how do we protect those that are the most vulnerable, right? And those are not just people that are elderly of age that have compromised immune systems, but those that really struggle with mental health issues. How do we make sure that they are protected, especially during crisis like this, where anxiety levels, even amongst normal people, when you don't know if you're going to have a job tomorrow, or you're already out of a job and you don't know whenever you'll be able to find one. That's, as society, I think, the same principles that we apply for supply chains about how do we best protect the system, right? I think those principles are really, really important. Nassim Taleb gave a great conditions of anti-fragility. He said that the anti-fragile system just needs to satisfy 3 criteria. The first part is that it must have enough options that have asymmetry in its favor. Big upside if it works, small downside if it doesn't. I think that applies to a business, but also at a personal level, right? We should have enough options in terms of generating income for us that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. But the second part is that you must be willing to sacrifice parts that are not working, that are consuming scarce resources, but are not helping you to achieve your goal. And the third condition, which is probably the toughest, is that you have a rational way of making those 2 decisions, that you understand what the total impact is of those 2 decisions. So I think that's a really useful way also to apply to the personal level. For example, where we are helping people that are dealing with mental health issues, we apply those criteria for them as well. Because a person that believes that the best option is to take their own life is a person that's fragile. They are harmed much more by a downturn, by a negative stress, than what they benefit from a positive stress. So for those people, you have to help them, acknowledge it's like a business. When you run out of cash, you close the business down. But before you close the business down, there's 2 options that you've got. You can find a way of increasing the revenues. What gives you joy in life and how can you do more of that stuff? I think that's something that we all have to figure out while we're at home. What gives us joy? How can we get more of that done? And definitely connecting with others is one of those things. But the other part is also, how do we get the costs down? Why is it for these people, why is the cost to be alive often greater than their perceived benefit? Why is it so difficult to wake up in the morning? Can I think about the last time that it was easy for them to wake up in the morning and even look forward? What were they doing then? And how can they do that more often? So I think the analogy in terms of supply chains business can also be applied into personal life, in terms of how do we create conditions that allows individuals to become anti-fragile, that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, that you actually you benefit from volatility, positive and negative stresses in your life, rather than just be harmed by them.
And it's always the case, as Taleb talks about, that anti-fragility happens within a range. Outside the range, you still get killed. So the question is how to expand the range.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question, I'll open up the mic for Deepak Nagar, asking, what role will demand-driven MRP, et cetera, will play in these conditions?
So I'll take that, and maybe some others can comment. As one of the things that we've been doing recently is in our supply simulation models, we've been modeling DDMRP, demand-driven MRP, and you can compare them with any traditional rule like min-max, EOQ, ROP, traditional MRP, and also the theory of constraints rules. And what we've seen is that these demand-driven rules are, like the theory of constraints rules, are remarkably robust because they have a dynamic nature from them, right? They are learning all the time, not based on some very sophisticated artificial intelligence equation, but simply because they are saying, if I go too frequently in the red, either my demand has gone up or my supply lead time have deteriorated, and I need to increase my target stock levels, or I need to increase my capacity or time. So I think demand-driven, it's an application like theory of constraints, but the principles are universal, and there is never a better time to implement these principles across supply chains. As Miguel was saying, we have a responsibility to make available point of sale data of what's actually selling or being bought by the end consumer to everybody in the supply chain, so that everybody can quickly react if there's significant changes in demand, but also significant changes in assortment. In fact, we have a little simulation that I'll share the link with everybody. It's called hannashshop.com. You can go there and play with it. It's a free simulation that you can play online, but that will show you, we even have a pandemic mode. So one of the stores that you can simulate is a health store. And if you click on the pandemic button, it creates a scenario where some products, the demand dramatically increases, others dramatically reduce. And as long as those ups and downs are equalized, you think, well, surely my shop will be doing the same at the end of the month. But of course it doesn't, because when the demand goes down, you lose sales. When demand dramatically goes up and you can't respond fast enough to that, and you have shortages, your store is going to lose massive amount of money. So I'll share the link with everybody. It's a nice, fun way of understanding how any form of demand-driven algorithms will always outperform traditional algorithms like min-max that are static-based and are based on forecast rather than based on what's really happening on the demand and supply side.
Okay.
I think that here it's very important to say that, at least for us, I mean, if I look on the past, for us, forecast was the no word. And then the only thing we could say about forecast is that it's always wrong. I have a client.
For players in which
only planning department is 400 people only in Europe, only to do a forecast. And they actually forced us to take the forecast as part of our calculation. So we are not only looking on the past, and we're always looking for patterns in the past and so on, 6 months or a year or 2 years and so on. We don't just look on what is happening today, what was the consumption today, but we look 1 RRT, 2 RRT, sometimes 3 RRT forward, because they have 400 people that give us a forecast. But we do also some calculations on the forecast accuracy. So if the RRT of a specific part is I don't know, 1 day or 2 months or 6 months, we take the windows of the RRT backward and compare consumption versus the forecast, and we have some statistics and some learning in order to work on what we call, I'm not sure that it's the good term, the forecast accuracy. So if once forecast for us was a word that you cannot say, today it's part from our calculations, and I think it's a must.
Thank you. I have a question coming in. It was directed for Alan. I think anyone can answer as well, but it's rather than trying to predict one option for COVID-19 recovery, isn't it reasonable to expect that various market segments will follow different patterns? In other words, the dilemma for strategic planning is, quote, all of the above. Also, aren't second and third waves real possibilities that will in turn lead to partial recoveries and backsliding before any segment achieves full recovery? In other words, the chaos phase could last for years. So you can comment on that.
Yes, I think thank you for making that point. The idea is not to try to predict what the recovery pattern would look like, but rather to model all the possibilities and prepare for each of those. You know, to argue about whether a specific outcome is probable or not is, I think, a waste of time. What you should do is to say, can it happen? So for every major product category and every one of your markets, what can happen? How can that recovery look? Let's model each of those and see what will be the impact of that, and then how best to prepare for that, and how best can we detect whether one pattern is starting to happen rather than another one. So that's why I showed all four, is to say, don't try to predict accurately which one. If all four of those can happen to your business, you'll have to model each one of them and see what the impact will be on your operational and financial performance, and how best to prepare and protect yourself against that, or how best to capitalize on it when it does happen.
Thank you, Alan. This next question is coming from Sandeep Chatterjee, specifically for the steel industry being very highly dependent on infrastructure and automobile. How does the steel industry survive during this time?
I can try to answer maybe some.
Alan, I'm so sorry. Before you answer, I need to apologize. I must go. So I'm so sorry about it. But thank you so much for the time, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Yaniv.
Thanks, Yaniv. Good to see you.
Thank you. I think it's the same answer that many industries are facing, is that within your portfolio of products, there's going to be some products where the demand is going to go down dramatically and might stay down for a long time, or maybe even forever. But there will be other products that the demand will go up. So you do really need to be looking at which of those products the demand is going to go up, and start preparing for how can you produce more of those and less of the others, and also what would be a fair price for those. So one of the things that we've implemented within the steel industry is an automatic mechanism that says, when your buffer levels, your stock levels go down into the red, you should have an agreement with your market that the price is automatically going up. Because basically what you want to do is that there's a single priority system that you want to be using, and sometimes price really helps. So you want to send a signal to the market that says, listen, if you've already got 3 months of this specific grade, don't buy now, because we have to charge a premium because there's a shortage of supply. Whereas if you only have 3 days of supply, you know, there's a cost of having it, but there's a cost of not having it. So I think switching over to those products that are really selling, but also looking at what is the fair way of pricing those products, especially during periods when the shortage is so great. We've seen what happens with the personal protective equipment. It's very easy to exploit the situation, and governments will come down hard on you. So before you get into that situation, I think it's prudent to work with your customers and suppliers to say, what would be a fair way of pricing when there is really a shortage for some of the products or services that we provide, so that pricing can be used as a fair way of judging whether I should buy it now or later.
Yeah, and I think probably the situation today is that there's too much supply and not enough demand. That's more the concern. So in those times, the steel industry tends to measure tons per hour. So whatever gives the fewest tons per hour, that's what you should sell. Nobody else wants to sell it. You get a chance to have some business there if you focused on products, thin, highly coated, highly improved, thin, cold rolled product, things like that other people don't care to sell. It will force you to relook at your metrics at a steel plant, but nevertheless, we do want to run something. We want to be producing something and running it through. This is one of those times where the hungry hyenas are waiting for another one to die, and there'll be cannibalization. Many cheers when one steel company goes out of business, and then the others scramble to pick up that capacity that suddenly went off. And it's a terrible situation, because then it leads to the situation Alan was just talking about, where there isn't enough to go around, and you're in the red zone. You aren't able to produce enough, and your prices start to fluctuate. Steel has an enormous price fluctuation. It's like oil. it goes like crazy from highs to lows, perhaps more so than oil. So these are difficult times. But go to the place where the other people don't want to go. Seems like a good strategy.
Yeah, I think one of the opportunities for the steel industry is normally after a recession, there's massive stimulus that's made available by governments, and they have to spend that money on something to create the employment. And normally, infrastructure is one of those cases. So you could probably expect that there's going to be a massive increase in the amount of infrastructure projects, rebuilding bridges and roads, etc. That probably can provide that silver lining to the steel industry. But you have to be prepared for that, right? If you are starting to cut down or laying off people and closing down facilities, you're not going to be able to prepare to capitalize on that when it's likely going to happen.
And they're the industries that are most likely not to have the cash runway, Alan, you just mentioned before, in time, that there's not enough time before the cash runs out to stay around to get the benefit of the infrastructure, the new bridges that are going up.
Sandeep, your microphone is open. I don't know if you want to ask any further clarification or further questions. Okay, we'll close up that question then. I'm going to move on to a question coming into to Miguel. This person has left, but wanted to have that question read to you. If you could, please provide the source of OSA, as the good use of stock coverage is always to be measured in terms of future demand. And how do you get to a good/useful data if you're managing hundreds and thousands of SKUs?
Yes, we have the data, and the OSA is a algorithm based on the previous week, where we have weighted the last week in a higher weight, and then let's say 4-3-2-1. So it's basic a forecast in short term. So if we are selling this product last week, let's put it this way, it's probably we are going to sell next week as well. And then if we have availability for this next week, this is the concept of OSA. Of course, we have these algorithms. There are root causes for this OSA because sometimes it's not available on the shelf, but it is available on the back store. And sometimes you don't have even on the distribution center. So the OSA has all these root causes. It's an algorithm that we partner with Nielsen, and we have applied to all the data that we get from our clients. And we say the OSA absolutely is important on shelf availability, but you cannot build OSA and have your inventory going to the roof. It's important also to monitor the inventory turns. So if you have a good availability, and also we have created the activity level, which means the fast movers should have higher OSA. And of course, the slow mover, if you don't have high availability, is not a huge problem. So we recommend also to have OSA by the activity level. Fast mover, high OSA, and high inventory turns. Slow mover, we can accept to have lower availability. So that's the concept.
I want to just support something that Miguel just ended off with. This is I think that on-shelf availability is an important metric, but you need to quantify that in terms of monetary terms. And a simple way to do that is to say that if I'm measuring the number of stock out days that I've got for a specific product, I can multiply the number of stock out days with the sales velocity in dollar terms when I had stock, right? So I sell typically $1,000 a day of this product. I was 2 days out of stock. So that was $2,000 of sales that I'm putting at risk. Because what we've seen in many cases is that, is 98% on-shelf availability, is that good? Well, it looks like 2% of the time I don't have the stock. but that 2% of the time is on the highest sales velocity items that might represent 10% of my total sales. So I think quantifying it based on the number of days that you were out of stock multiplied by the sales velocity in dollar terms per day when you had stock, that's a really great way of identifying which of the products is most critical to solve the on-shelf availability problem and which ones are not that important to solve, as Miguel said.
And just to add on to that, be sure that whatever you measure as far as lost sales is less than the lost sales you actually have, because one on the shelf, when people like to buy 6s and 10s, doesn't look like OSA, but on the other hand, it sure does block the customers that want to buy 6 and 10.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, listen, we're getting at the 2.5 hour point here. Jennifer, if you don't mind, I was just looking through our list of questions, try to find something that hasn't been asked yet or relatedly asked. There's still a lot of questions, and we have this one submitted by, I hope I pronounce this right, Jacek Ledzinski. I'm not sure. He's still with us. And the question was, what future do you foresee for the construction industry? Before the crisis, we were building shopping centers. Investments in this industry will probably be frozen for a long time. What are your forecasts for prospects for construction companies? How will changes in supply chains affect the strategies and activities of construction companies? I'll take the first stab at that. If there's an industry that needs to pay attention where trends are now, and they should have been already, right? There's been a decrease in the attractiveness of shopping malls. There has been an increase in the attractiveness of shopping centers. Shopping malls are being converted to community centers. This crisis is going to make a lot of companies look at just how much office space do I really need? Is it better for an environment for my people to have flexibility to work from home? Childcare, parental care, all things considered. So do we have a forecast of where it's going? No, I don't. I have clients in the construction industry from all types, from specialty contractors to general contractors, large and small. They've all enjoyed a pretty good, robust last 15 or so years, doing well. The only, it was just a slowdown. It wasn't even hurt. It was back in 1998, 99. Would have been in the 2000. But my point is, I don't have a forecast other than it's an industry that really needs to pay attention of what is happening with bricks and mortar retail and now bricks and mortar office location space. So they need to heed what we're suggesting here is pay attention to the industry and best prepare yourself to strategically direct your company's efforts. Anyone else have anything?
Yeah, just a glance at the construction industry. It's all over the map. Single housing starts are up, multi-housing starts are up, combined multi-tenant retail, like you say, is in tank. Warehouses have been constructed in the United States like crazy over the last number of years. So now there's no growth in warehouse, which is smart in my opinion, because what I think construction companies need to start making is manufacturing plants close to the point of use. And there's where the demand's going to be. There is no demand today for building those plants. Yet we've all talked on the call that it's obvious that more people will need to be producing goods closer to the point of use. The supply chains are getting shorter. We heard that from every panelist. And if that's the case, then it's manufacturing plants that aren't being built. We're behind. We won't be able to catch up for a decade.
Which then brings in the whole. Just let me add the comment there, Alan. Which then brings in the whole concept of speeding up project management, right? Which TOC, like no other, has made significant, huge reduction in cycle time and project management. So that's a whole other subject that, by the way, will be addressed in our virtual conference. Alan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think it's just to support Henry's point there is I think that you need to look at, you know, what are the type of infrastructure projects that's not going to go away and might even accelerate. So as you're moving into fresh produce, you know, the regional distribution centers would have to be much more closer to people being supplied. More and more people are now buying online. So probably warehouse construction, distribution center construction, housing, also hospitals. Those are the type of things that you look at. The government is going to have to spend the money somewhere, and they'll probably invest it where there's a certainty that there's going to be a demand for that. I think definitely if you're in a space at the moment where you were building shopping centers before and hotels, you're definitely in trouble. You need to be pivoting and look at how you can move towards those areas. Exactly. Even schools, I think it's going to be a major challenge in the future.
Yeah. Well, okay, Jennifer, let me ask, in your scan of the questions, is there anything subject matter that, especially for people still hanging on, a number of people ask questions have had to leave, and I understand that. Is there anything that we should ask the panel, or it's going to be time to move on?
Well, there's some questions that seem to be coming around how to manage cash effectively. So a lot of various questions of that nature. I don't know if we've already did some things, but
that's really not. I mean, I think there's been a lot of good discussion here. That wasn't the subject matter here.
Yeah.
The biggest thing related to this subject matter, the supply chain, is pay attention to your supply chain, because if you're not doing everything to protect flow, you're spending money other than protecting the flow of your product. You're wasting cash. Right?
And for sure, if you could shorten your supply chain, the time from the time you place an order till the time you receive the product, or even the delay that you make before placing an order, you can shorten that replenishment time. You will have more cash.
Yep. Yep. Increasing inventory turns increases cash velocity.
But I don't think nobody knows how to increase inventory turns, Rocco. What they do know how to do is buy with a shorter duration before they get replenished. Everybody knows how to do that. If they do that, they'll have more cash. I'm not sure they'll have enough cash, but they'll have more.
Don't buy 3 months of goods at the same time. You know, right. I can get replenished every week, so just buy the maximum that you think that you can sell in a week. That's like the fastest way of saving cash.
Just like your grandfather, you open up your wallet. If there's money to buy inventory, you take it out and you buy inventory, no more than you need.
Yep. Ask questions to people about, you know, one of my favorite questions in going to a distribution environment, I said, give me your longest lead time product on a shelf in here, and if you had to buy it now, how long would it take to replace? And 98% of the time, the answer is like, well, I can have it within the week. And how much do you have on hand? Well, I have 2 months supply on hand. Well,
yeah.
And they're proud of that because of the money, the 2 cents per unit they saved by buying 2 months. Go ahead. Who was that?
People are interested in cash more in depth than that. Ravi Kalani in India is an expert in that. Does quite a lot of consulting around that. He's had 2 extraordinarily good webinars in the last week that are available to people if they want to go research Ravi Kalani.
Yeah, I saw one of them. It's very good about conserving cash in your operations. It's very good. Highly recommend it.
It's gone nighttime for Alan.
Jen, anything else then? Okay. We I think we've hit the cash relatedly.
Yeah,
hopefully sufficient enough. Okay.
And I'll share Robbie's name into the chat with those left on the webinar here. But I think that's hit most of the questions that have come through, have been answered in some way, shape, or form. There was one about if you wanted to comment with the U.S. Meat distribution and what's happening here in the U.S. with the shortages. I don't know, just because it's a hot topic right now, if you want to maybe comment to that. But otherwise, I don't. I think we're through most of the questions. So.
Good. Well, let's stop it there. Anybody wants to email me, you're certainly welcome to, or hit me on LinkedIn or whatever you like. I'll try my best to answer or direct people to someone who can answer well.
Same for any of us, and I hope relatedly we've piqued enough interest that you would consider joining our virtual conference. We're making it very affordable. Speaking of cost, we kept the variable cost down, so it's very a lot of good in-depth topics, high-end topics. So I hope you can join us. And if I remember correctly, Jennifer, you had more direct contact. Our partners here, the American Society of Supply Chain Management, or the Association of Supply Chain Management, excuse me, is also doing a virtual conference coming up soon. So you might want to check their website. Okay, gentlemen, who's ever still on the line? I think Alan's there, Miguel's there, Henry's there, I'm here. I think Peter left, and I think Yaniv had to leave. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Keep feedback coming to us if you wish, or questions, however you wish to do it. Thank you all for attending.